Sophia looked out the window at the passing landscape of manicured estates and exclusive boutiques. "I suppose it isn't," she said quietly. As they drove home through Connecticut's gold-leafed October countryside, Victoria found herself truly listening to her daughter for perhaps the first time in years. Not listening for evidence of academic achievement or proper social development, but listening for signs of who Sophia actually was beneath her impeccable behavior. What she heard was a lonely, intelligent child who had learned to hide her emotional needs so effectively that even her own mother had stopped seeing them. That evening, after Sophia had completed her homework and practiced piano with the dedication of a small professional, Victoria found herself in an unexpected location, Esperanza Morales' former room in the staff quarters. Mrs. Henderson had mentioned that Esperanza had left behind several personal items in her hurried departure, and Victoria had decided to handle their disposal personally. The room was small but meticulously organized, with just a narrow bed, a simple desk, and a compact wardrobe. On the desk, Victoria discovered something that made her breath catch, a photograph of two young girls who appeared to be about Sophia's age, both smiling at the camera with uninhibited joy. Beside the photo was a small notebook, left open to a page covered with Esperanza's careful handwriting. Victoria knew she was violating Esperanza's privacy by reading it. It was personal, private, completely inappropriate for an employer to examine, but something compelled her to look at the words on the page. What she found were practice notes, dozens of variations on the encouraging messages Esperanza had been placing in Sophia's lunch container. Some were crossed out with careful editing, others refined through multiple drafts, all of them focused on building up a child's confidence and sense of worth. "You are braver than you know you are. Someone believes in your wonderful dreams today. Your kindness makes everyone's world brighter. You are exactly perfect as you are." At the bottom of the page, in Esperanza's neat handwriting, was a longer passage that made Victoria's hands tremble. "Carmen and Lucia are 11 now, 2 years older than Miss Sophia. When I video call them every Sunday, they tell me about their friends, their school projects, their dreams of becoming teachers and doctors. They laugh so much, even though we have so little money. Miss Sophia never laughs like that. She is so careful, so serious, so alone in her beautiful house. I know it is not my place, but when I see her in the mornings, sitting so properly and quietly, I think of my girls. I think of what I would want someone to do for Carmen and Lucia if they were far from their mama and looked the way Miss Sophia looks every day. I would want someone to tell them they are loved. I would want someone to see that they were hurting inside their perfect lives." Victoria sank into the small wooden chair, the notebook shaking in her hands. Esperanza hadn't been overstepping her professional boundaries out of some inappropriate attachment or hidden agenda. She had recognized Sophia's emotional isolation through the eyes of a mother, separated from her own children, and she had tried to provide comfort the only way her position allowed, and Victoria had fired her for it. For the first time since her divorce from Michael, Victoria Ashford felt the crushing weight of what she had lost when she retreated into the safety of professional achievement. She had been so focused on providing financial security and ensuring Sophia's academic success that she had forgotten to simply be present in her daughter's emotional life, to see her struggles, to offer the unconditional love that no amount of money could replace. Esperanza, a woman Victoria had barely acknowledged as a full human being, had shown more genuine attention to Sophia's heart than Victoria had demonstrated in years. The mirror of truth. As Victoria sat in that humble room, surrounded by evidence of a stranger's devotion to her child, she began to see the truth that Esperanza had tried to communicate through those careful notes. Sophia wasn't thriving in their perfect world. She was surviving it. The little girl had learned to perform the role of a successful, well-adjusted child so convincingly that even her own mother had been fooled. But Esperanza had seen through the performance to the lonely heart underneath. Victoria thought about her own childhood in a similar house, with similar expectations and similar emotional distance. She remembered the loneliness of always having to be perfect, the exhaustion of never being allowed to simply be a child with messy feelings and inconvenient needs. She had sworn that she would give Sophia everything she herself had lacked: financial security, educational opportunities, freedom from economic anxiety. But in her determination to provide everything money could buy, Victoria had forgotten to provide the one thing that couldn't be purchased: her genuine, present, unconditional attention. The evidence was everywhere, now that Victoria was willing to see it. Sophia's careful behavior, her performance-oriented responses, her lack of close friendships, her acceptance of adult decisions without question, these weren't signs of a well-adjusted child. They were signs of a child who had learned that love was conditional on perfect behavior, that attention was earned through achievement, and that her own emotional needs were less important than the adult's comfort and convenience. Esperanza had seen what Victoria had missed, that underneath Sophia's perfect exterior was a little girl who desperately needed to know that someone cared about her feelings, not just her performance. Victoria carefully placed the notebook back on the desk and stood up slowly. The charity auction had raised $300,000 for children's literacy programs. The pension fund crisis had been temporarily resolved through her presentation. Her investment portfolio was performing above market averages. By every external measure, her life was a resounding success. But as she walked back to her empty master suite, past her daughter's closed bedroom door, Victoria realized that she had been succeeding at the wrong things. She had built a financial empire while failing at the most important job she would ever have, being Sophia's mother, in the fullest sense of the word. The question that haunted her as she lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling of her perfect house, was both simple and devastating. What kind of mother had she become that her daughter needed to receive love and encouragement from secret notes hidden in her lunchbox? And more urgently, was it too late to become the mother Sophia actually needed? The weight of recognition. The next morning brought another first in Victoria's carefully structured life. She cancelled her early conference call with the Tokyo markets and instead sat at the breakfast counter with Sophia, really watching her daughter's morning routine. Sophia performed her usual ritual, reviewing vocabulary words while eating measured portions of organic cereal, checking her backpack organization twice, ensuring her uniform met Willowbrook's exact specifications. But now Victoria could see what Esperanza had observed, the mechanical quality of these actions, as if Sophia was going through the motions of being a perfect student without any joy in the process. "Sophia," Victoria said carefully, "what do you think about during the school day?" The question seemed to surprise her daughter. "I focus on my lessons, mother. Mrs. Whitmore says concentration is essential for academic success. But what do you think about during lunch or recess?" Sophia looked genuinely puzzled by the question. I review my afternoon assignments during lunch, and we don't have traditional recess at Willowbrook. We have structured enrichment activities." Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of enrichment activities? Advanced mathematics tutoring on Mondays, piano practice on Wednesdays, French conversation on Fridays. Sophia considered this question with the seriousness of a small adult. Fun isn't really part of the curriculum, mother. As Victoria drove to her office that morning, she couldn't stop thinking about Sophia's matter-of-fact acceptance that fun wasn't part of her daily experience. When had Victoria stopped prioritizing her daughter's happiness? When had she become so focused on building Sophia's resume that she forgot to build her childhood? The day passed in a blur of client meetings and market analysis, but Victoria found herself constantly distracted by memories of Esperanza's notebook. The careful way she had practiced those encouraging messages, the love evident in every crossed-out word and refined phrase, the recognition that Sophia needed something Victoria wasn't providing. That evening, Victoria made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. She dismissed the evening tutor who came for Sophia's advanced mathematics sessions and instead sat with her daughter in the estate's library. "Sophia," she said, "I want you to tell me about something that makes you happy." Sophia looked genuinely confused. "Happy, mother? Something you enjoy, something that brings you joy." After a long pause, Sophia said quietly, "Sometimes Miss Esperanza would let me help her arrange flowers from the garden. She would tell me stories about her daughters while we worked. She said they were very good at making flower crowns." Victoria felt her heart constrict. "Did you like hearing those stories?" "Yes," Sophia admitted, then quickly added, "but I know it wasn't educational time well spent." "What if I told you," Victoria said carefully, "that sometimes the most important learning happens when we're just being happy?" Sophia looked at her mother with an expression of cautious hope, as if Victoria had suggested something wonderful but possibly forbidden. And in that moment, Victoria realized the full scope of what she needed to change. It wasn't just about finding a new housekeeper or adjusting Sophia's schedule. It was about fundamentally reimagining what it meant to be a mother, what it meant to provide for a child's real needs, and what kind of legacy she actually wanted to build. The notes in Sophia's lunchbox had been symptoms of a deeper problem. Victoria had created a perfect life that was perfectly empty of the things that actually mattered. The crystal chandeliers of Rosewood Estate cast dancing shadows across imported Italian marble, creating patterns that had witnessed 3 generations of Ashford family wealth and privilege. For 38-year-old Victoria Ashford, the silence between her designer heels clicking against the polished floors had never felt more deafening. But on this seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning in October, as she hurried toward the gourmet kitchen to finalize arrangements for tonight's charity auction, she stopped cold at what she witnessed. There, bent over her 9-year-old daughter's lunch container, with the gentle care of someone tending to precious treasure, was their live-in housekeeper Esperanza Morales, carefully tucking small folded papers between the organic sandwiches and fresh fruit. And when Esperanza looked up with eyes brimming with tears and unmistakable fear, Victoria realized that everything she believed about her perfectly controlled world and her own heart was about to crumble into pieces. Rosewood Estate wasn't merely a residence. It was a fortress of success perched on 40 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, every stone and garden path announcing the dominance of the Ashford name in American finance. The sprawling Georgian mansion housed not just a family, but a legacy built on shrewd investments, strategic acquisitions, and an unwavering belief that excellence was not just expected, it was mandatory. Victoria Ashford had inherited more than stock portfolios and real estate holdings. She had inherited the relentless drive that built the family empire. As Chief Executive Officer of Ashford Capital Management, she commanded a firm worth over $200 million, managed pension funds for Fortune 500 companies, and sat on the boards of 4 major corporations. Her days began at 4:30 a.m. with market analysis from Tokyo and London, continued through back-to-back meetings with clients who trusted her with their life savings, and often ended past midnight as she reviewed acquisition proposals that could reshape entire industries. The financial press called her brilliant. Business journals featured her on their covers. Politicians sought her counsel on economic policy. At 38, Victoria Ashford was everything American capitalism promised women could become: powerful, wealthy, and utterly in control of her destiny. But Victoria's greatest achievement, the one she would trade everything else to protect, was her daughter Sophia, 9 years old with chestnut curls that refused to stay perfectly styled and warm brown eyes that held flashes of curiosity her mother rarely had time to nurture. Sophia represented Victoria's hopes for continuing the Ashford legacy into the next generation. The child was enrolled at Willowbrook Academy, the most exclusive private school in the county, where she studied advanced mathematics, spoke conversational French, and learned the social graces expected of someone destined for leadership. Sophia's father, Dr. Michael Chen, had been Victoria's college sweetheart and briefly her husband. Their marriage had lasted 3 years before Michael's idealistic vision of practicing medicine in underserved communities clashed irreparably with Victoria's ambitions in high finance. The divorce had been civilized, expensive and final. Michael now worked with Doctors Without Borders, sending postcards from refugee camps and war zones, while Victoria built an empire that could provide for their daughter's every material need. In the 4 years since the divorce, Victoria had thrown herself into work with renewed intensity. She told herself that building generational wealth was the greatest gift she could give Sophia: security, opportunity, and freedom from the limitations that had constrained previous generations of women. Every deal she closed, every percentage point of return she generated, was an investment in her daughter's future. But somewhere in the endless cycle of board meetings and profit margins, Victoria had begun to rely more heavily on her household staff to manage the daily details of Sophia's life. It was more efficient, she reasoned. Esperanza could handle school pickups while Victoria negotiated with pension fund managers. The staff could supervise homework while Victoria analyzed market trends from European exchanges. Professional childcare allowed Victoria to focus on what she did best, making money and securing their future. The silent guardian Esperanza Morales understood invisibility in ways that Victoria Ashford never could. At 31, she moved through Rosewood Estate like a gentle ghost, accomplishing miracles of domestic management, while remaining essentially unseen by the family she served. She had arrived from El Salvador 6 years ago with nothing but determination, and a heart heavy with the memory of the twin daughters she had left behind with her aging mother. To the Ashford family, Esperanza was simply part of the house's seamless operation, reliable, efficient and appropriately invisible. She managed the cleaning schedules, coordinated with the gardening staff, and gradually took on more responsibility for Sophia's daily care as Victoria's business demands intensified. Her English had improved dramatically over the years, though she still spoke softly, as if afraid that too much volume might remind people she existed. But Esperanza saw everything with the clarity that comes from watching life from the margins. She noticed that Miss Victoria worked until exhaustion clouded her eyes, that she spoke to her daughter in the same brisk professional tone she used with business associates, and that little Sophia had learned to seek attention through perfect behavior, rather than childish joy. Esperanza observed the way mother and daughter moved around each other like polite strangers sharing the same beautiful space, each lost in separate worlds of responsibility and expectation. Esperanza's own heart was split across continents and currencies. Every month she sent $2,800 of her $3,200 salary to El Salvador, keeping barely enough for personal necessities. Her twin daughters Carmen and Lucia were now 11 years old, older than Sophia, and existed for their mother mainly as voices on scratchy video calls and school photos taped to her small bedroom mirror. She had missed their first communion, their school plays, their growing into young women who politely called her mama, but whose daily lives were filled with people and experiences she would never share. The guilt was a constant companion, sharp and unforgiving. Every night, as she prepared Sophia's clothes for the next day, or helped with homework that Esperanza could barely understand, she thought of Carmen and Lucia doing the same tasks with their grandmother's help. Every soft moment with Sophia, braiding her hair, listening to her practice piano, reading bedtime stories, was both a comfort and a reminder of the maternal experiences she was trading for economic survival. But slowly, almost without conscious decision, Esperanza had begun to love Sophia with the fierce protectiveness of someone who understood what it meant to be separated from the people who needed you most. She noticed when the little girl seemed lonely, remembered her preferences for food and activities, and found small ways to brighten days that seemed too structured and serious for a 9-year-old. She told herself it was simply professional dedication, excellent service. She couldn't acknowledge, even to herself, that caring for this privileged lonely child was both healing and devastating her heart in equal measure. The house of careful distance Wednesday mornings at Rosewood Estate followed a choreographed routine as precise as any corporate merger. Victoria would complete her first hour of market analysis in her home office, while Sophia dressed and ate breakfast in the kitchen with Esperanza. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Victoria would appear for 15 minutes of quality time with her daughter, reviewing the day's schedule, checking homework completion, and ensuring Sophia's appearance met Willowbrook Academy's standards. By 7:30 a.m., Sophia would be collected by the private car service that transported her to school, while Victoria transitioned into her first video conference with the London office. Esperanza would clean up breakfast, pack Sophia's lunch with meticulous attention to nutrition and presentation, and begin the daily routine of maintaining a house that needed to look perfect for the evening's inevitable business entertainment. This particular Wednesday had begun with unusual stress. Victoria's largest client, the Municipal Employees Pension Fund, was considering moving their $50 million account to a competitor, and Victoria had spent the pre-dawn hours crafting a presentation that could save the relationship. The charity auction she was hosting that evening would bring together potential investors she desperately needed to impress, and the detailed planning was consuming mental energy she didn't have to spare. Victoria had intended to grab a quick espresso and remind Esperanza about the evening's catering timeline before diving into her presentation preparations. But as she approached the kitchen, moving quickly while reviewing notes on her phone, she heard something that made her stop completely. Esperanza was crying, not the controlled private tears that household staff were trained to hide, but deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to come from years of accumulated pain. Victoria stood frozen in the hallway, uncertain whether to retreat or intervene. In 6 years of employing Esperanza Morales, she had never seen her display any emotion stronger than polite concern for household efficiency. But as Victoria watched, something even more puzzling unfolded. Esperanza was carefully folding small pieces of paper and placing them inside Sophia's lunch container, arranging them between the sandwiches and fruit with the tenderness of someone handling sacred objects. Her tears fell freely as she worked, and she whispered something in Spanish that Victoria couldn't understand. Victoria's business instincts immediately went to the worst possible scenarios. Was Esperanza passing information to someone outside the house? Victoria's home office contained sensitive financial data, client information, and strategic plans that could be worth millions to the right competitors. Did this woman have access to family schedules, security codes, and personal details that could compromise their safety? What exactly are you doing? Victoria's voice cut through the kitchen's quiet efficiency like a knife through silk. Esperanza spun around, her face transforming instantly from grief to terror. The small piece of paper in her hands fluttered to the floor, and she immediately moved to retrieve it, but Victoria was faster. She stepped forward and picked up the carefully folded note, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and protective fear. "Miss Victoria, please. I can explain," Esperanza began, but Victoria raised her hand for silence. Victoria's mind was racing through possibilities. Corporate espionage, inappropriate contact with Sophia, some kind of security breach that could endanger everything she had worked to build. Esperanza had unlimited access to their lives, their routines, their personal information, their vulnerabilities. Had Victoria been naive to trust someone she knew so little about? With growing apprehension, Victoria unfolded the paper and read its contents. What she discovered wasn't corporate secrets or security threats. In Esperanza's careful handwriting, in English that was clearly labored but sincere, were the words, "Sophia, you have a beautiful heart and a brilliant mind. Today will bring you something wonderful to discover. Someone who sees how special you are, believes in your dreams." Victoria stared at the note, her analytical mind struggling to process information that didn't fit her expected categories. She looked up at Esperanza, who stood motionless by the granite counter, her face streaked with tears and filled with the kind of terror that comes from knowing your life is about to be irrevocably altered. "How long?" Victoria asked, her voice controlled but dangerous. "Have you been putting notes in my daughter's lunch?" Esperanza's hands trembled as she tried to form words. "Miss Victoria, please, I only wanted to help. Answer the question. How long?" 8 months, Esperanza whispered, the admission barely audible. 8 months. Victoria felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. For 8 months, this woman had been secretly communicating with her daughter through hidden messages, and Victoria had been completely unaware. What else was happening in her own house that she didn't know about? What other aspects of Sophia's daily life was she missing while she focused on building their financial security? "Show me what else you've written," Victoria commanded. "There is nothing else," Esperanza said quickly. "I write new ones each morning, just for that day, just for Miss Sophia." "You write a new note every single morning?" Victoria's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from James, the estate manager, who was reviewing the morning's delivery schedule in the adjacent office. "Every day for 8 months, you've been putting secret messages in my daughter's food." The implications crashed over Victoria like a tsunami. This wasn't a single incident or even an occasional occurrence. This woman had been systematically communicating with Sophia behind Victoria's back every single school day for more than half a year. The level of systematic deception was staggering. "Why?" The word emerged hoarse, confused. "Why would you do this to us?" Esperanza looked down at her clasped hands, tears falling freely now. She seemed so sad, Miss Victoria. Every morning, she would sit at the breakfast counter finishing her homework, and she looked so lonely. I wanted her to know that someone was thinking about her during the day. Victoria felt her carefully ordered world shift off its axis. Sophia seemed sad. Sophia looked lonely. This was completely contrary to Victoria's understanding of her daughter as a well-adjusted, privileged child who had every advantage money could provide. "That is absolutely not your responsibility," Victoria said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Sophia is my daughter. Her emotional needs are my concern, not yours." "Yes, Miss Victoria," Esperanza agreed immediately. "I know I was wrong. I know I overstepped my position." But even as she apologized, Victoria could see in Esperanza's eyes that she wasn't truly sorry for caring about Sophia. She was sorry for being discovered. And that distinction disturbed Victoria more than she wanted to acknowledge. "Pack your belongings," Victoria said, retreating to the familiar safety of executive authority. "I want you off this property within 2 hours." Esperanza's face crumpled, but she nodded with dignity. "Yes, Miss Victoria, I understand completely." As she moved toward the door, Victoria called after her. "And Esperanza, if I discover you've had any inappropriate contact with my daughter, if there's anything else you haven't told me, I will ensure you never work in this country again." Esperanza paused at the doorway, and for a moment her fear was replaced by something that resembled compassion. "There was nothing inappropriate, Miss Victoria, never. I only wanted her to feel less alone in her big, beautiful world." After Esperanza left, Victoria stood alone in the pristine kitchen, holding the small piece of paper that had shattered her morning routine. The words seemed to blur as she read them again. "Sophia, you have a beautiful heart and a brilliant mind. Today will bring you something wonderful to discover." For the first time in months, Victoria Ashford found herself questioning what her daughter's days were actually like, and why a housekeeper had noticed something about Sophia's emotional state that she, the child's own mother, had completely failed to see. The cracks in the foundation. The remainder of Wednesday passed in a fog of distraction that Victoria found deeply unsettling. She attempted to focus on her presentation for the pension fund crisis, her calls with potential investors, and the countless details of hosting an event that could determine her firm's future. But her mind kept returning to Esperanza's tears and the careful way she had folded that note. She seemed so sad, Miss Victoria. Every morning, she would sit at the breakfast counter finishing her homework, and she looked so lonely. Victoria realized with uncomfortable clarity that she couldn't remember the last time she had truly observed Sophia during their morning routines. She was always multitasking, always reviewing market data, or preparing for meetings, always treating her daughter's presence as background atmosphere to her important professional concerns. When Sophia returned from Willowbrook Academy that afternoon, Victoria made an unprecedented decision to be present for her daughter's arrival. For the first time in weeks, she really looked at Sophia as the girl came through the front entrance with her monogrammed school bag and empty lunch container. Sophia was perfectly composed as always, greeting her mother with appropriate respect before heading toward the kitchen for her supervised study period. But Victoria noticed details she had somehow overlooked before. The way Sophia's posture seemed to carry responsibilities too heavy for a 9-year-old. The way her eyes held a certain practiced distance, as if she had learned not to expect spontaneous attention or affection from the adults in her life. "Sophia," Victoria called, and her daughter turned with the quick alert expression of a child who had learned that adults summoning her usually meant evaluation or correction. "Yes, mother. How was your day at school?" Sophia's face registered subtle surprise, as if this was an unusual question. "It was excellent, mother. I received the highest score on our French vocabulary examination." "That's wonderful," Victoria said, and she genuinely meant it. But she also noticed that Sophia's response was delivered like a performance review, not like a child sharing excitement with someone who cared about her happiness. "Did anything particularly interesting happen today?" Victoria pressed, trying to understand what Esperanza might have observed that she had missed. Sophia considered this question with characteristic seriousness. "Mrs. Patterson brought her new puppy for our science lesson about animal behavior. It was quite educational and well behaved." "Did you enjoy meeting the puppy?" "Yes, mother. It was pleasant." Victoria studied her daughter's carefully controlled expression. Sophia was providing all the correct answers, demonstrating proper vocabulary and respectful tone, but there was something hollow about the interaction, as if she was performing the role of a successful student daughter, rather than simply being a child sharing her day. "Sophia," Victoria said slowly, "are you happy at Willowbrook?" This question seemed to genuinely perplex the girl. She blinked several times, her composure wavering slightly. "I believe my academic performance is satisfactory, mother. My teachers consistently praise my work habits and behavior." "That's not what I'm asking," Victoria said, and for the first time in their conversation, Sophia looked uncertain about how to respond. "Yes, mother, I am happy." But the hesitation before her answer revealed everything Victoria needed to know. Her daughter was providing the response she believed was expected, not necessarily expressing her genuine feelings. That evening, as Victoria hosted her charity auction in the estate's grand ballroom, she found herself distracted by thoughts that had nothing to do with municipal pension funds or potential investors.
While she smiled and networked with Connecticut's wealthiest philanthropists, she kept thinking about Esperanza Morales and what the woman had seen in Sofia that prompted 8 months of secret encouragement. The investigation begins. The next morning, Victoria found herself doing something unprecedented, lingering in the kitchen during Sofia's breakfast routine instead of immediately diving into market analysis. Mrs. Henderson, the temporary replacement housekeeper, was managing the morning schedule with professional competence, but the atmosphere felt fundamentally different. Sofia sat at the marble breakfast counter as usual, methodically eating her organic cereal, while reviewing notes for a history quiz. But Victoria noticed that her daughter kept glancing toward the area where Esperanza used to prepare her lunch with such careful attention. When Mrs. Henderson handed her the lunch container, efficiently packed but lacking the special touches Esperanza had provided, Sofia's face showed a flicker of disappointment. "Is everything satisfactory this morning, Sofia?" Victoria asked. "Yes, mother," Sofia replied automatically, but then after a moment's hesitation that seemed to cost her considerable courage, she added, "Where is Miss Esperanza today?" Victoria felt an uncomfortable tightening in her chest. "Miss Esperanza is no longer employed with our family, Sofia." "May I ask why not?" It was such a simple, polite question, but Victoria found herself struggling to formulate an answer. How could she explain to a 9-year-old that she had fired someone for demonstrating too much care? She needed to pursue other opportunities, Victoria said finally. Sofia nodded with the solemn acceptance she had learned to show when adults made decisions that affected her life. But Victoria could see questions in her daughter's intelligent eyes that she was too well trained to voice. That afternoon, Victoria made another decision that surprised even herself. Instead of attending her scheduled conference call with the Seattle office, she personally drove to Willowbrook Academy to collect Sofia. It was something she hadn't done since the beginning of the school year, and Sofia's face showed genuine amazement when she saw her mother waiting by the school's imposing iron gates. "Mother, is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Victoria assured her. "I thought I might pick you up today myself." As they walked to Victoria's silver Mercedes together, Victoria tried to observe the school environment through her daughter's perspective. The other children seemed to cluster in natural groups, laughing and chattering as they waited for their parents or caregivers. Sofia walked quietly beside Victoria, perfectly mannered and composed, but not interacting with any of her classmates. "Do you have close friends at Willowbrook, Sofia?" Victoria asked, as they settled into the car's leather seats. Sofia considered this question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I maintain cordial relationships with my classmates, mother. That's not quite the same as having friends."
Victoria spent the entire weekend in a state of restless contemplation that felt foreign to someone accustomed to decisive action. She found herself studying Sofia with new eyes, watching for signs of the loneliness that Esperanza had recognized, but she had missed. The evidence was undeniable once she looked for it: the way Sofia accepted changes without question, the careful distance she maintained even during their conversations, the absence of spontaneous laughter or joy. By Monday morning, Victoria had made a decision that would have shocked her colleagues. She cleared her entire schedule and drove to the address she had found for Esperanza Morales. The apartment building in Hartford was a stark contrast to Rosewood Estate, 3 stories of weathered brick housing families who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. Victoria felt conspicuously out of place in her tailored business suit as she climbed the narrow stairs to apartment 2B. When Esperanza answered the door, her face cycled through surprise, fear and resignation in quick succession. She was wearing a simple dress and appeared to be preparing for another job interview, her resume and references organized neatly on a small table. "Miss Victoria," Esperanza said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you. May I come in? I need to speak with you." Esperanza's apartment was tiny but immaculate, filled with photographs of her twin daughters and the warm scent of coffee and vanilla. Victoria sat carefully on the small sofa, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "I read your notebook," Victoria began, then quickly added, "I know I had no right to, but I needed to understand why you wrote those notes." Esperanza looked down at her hands. "I should have asked permission. I know it was wrong." "Was it wrong?" Victoria asked, and the question surprised them both. "Esperanza, I need you to help me understand something. You saw that Sofia was lonely. How did I miss that?" For a long moment, Esperanza said nothing. Then, choosing her words carefully, she spoke. "Miss Victoria, you love Miss Sofia very much. I see that. But sometimes when we work very hard to give children everything, we forget to give them ourselves." The simple truth hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Tell me about your daughters," she said. Esperanza's face transformed as she reached for a photograph. "Carmen wants to be a doctor. Lucia loves mathematics. Like Miss Sofia, they help their grandmother with the market stall every day after school. They send me videos of themselves singing songs they learn. Do you regret leaving them?" "Every day," Esperanza admitted. "But I needed to give them chances I never had. Education opportunities. I thought if I worked hard enough here, I could bring them to America eventually." Victoria studied the photograph of the two smiling girls. "When you looked at Sofia, you saw your own daughters. I saw a child who had everything except what my daughters have. Someone who notices when they're sad, someone who tells them they're special just because they exist, not because they achieved something." The conversation continued for 2 hours. Victoria learned about Esperanza's sacrifices, her dreams, her heartbreak at missing her daughter's childhood. She learned about the careful attention Esperanza had paid to Sofia's moods, her needs, her small moments of joy and disappointment. "I want to offer you something," Victoria said finally. "Not just your job back, but a partnership." Esperanza looked confused. "I don't understand." "I want to bring your daughters here, legally properly. I want them to attend school with Sofia, live in the estate's guest house. I want you to help me learn how to be the mother Sofia needs while you get to be the mother your daughters deserve." Esperanza stared at Victoria in stunned silence. "You would do this?" "I've built a successful business, but I've failed at the most important job I'll ever have. You understood my daughter's heart in ways I never have. Maybe we can help each other become the mothers our children need." The process took 3 months of legal work, immigration attorneys and bureaucratic navigation that Victoria approached with the same intensity she brought to corporate acquisitions. During that time, she began making changes at home that started small but grew profound. She reduced her working hours and implemented technology-free time with Sofia each evening. She enrolled them both in a pottery class, where they could create imperfect, beautiful things together. She asked Sofia questions about her feelings, not just her achievements,
and learned to sit with the uncomfortable silences as her daughter slowly learned to trust that her emotions were welcome. Most importantly, Victoria began to model the vulnerability she wanted Sophia to feel safe expressing. She talked about missing Sophia's father, about her own childhood loneliness, about the fear that had driven her to prioritize financial security over emotional connection. When Carmen and Lucia Morales arrived at Rosewood Estate on a snowy February morning, the house felt different than it ever had before. The marble halls echoed with genuine laughter. The perfect gardens became places for children to build snow forts and chase each other around ancient oak trees. Sophia blossomed in ways Victoria had never imagined possible. With Carmen and Lucia as companions, she discovered the joy of friendship, of shared secrets and silly games. The careful distance in her eyes gradually gave way to brightness, spontaneity, and the messy complexity of genuine childhood emotion. Esperanza moved into the guest house with her daughters, but her role had evolved far beyond housekeeper. She became Victoria's partner in creating a home where children's emotional needs were prioritized alongside their educational development. She taught Victoria to see the small moments that mattered: Sophia's excitement about a butterfly in the garden, her pride in helping Carmen with English homework, her tears when Lucia was homesick for El Salvador. 6 months after the reunion, Victoria found herself in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, watching Esperanza pack lunches for all 3 girls. But now, instead of secret notes hidden between sandwiches, there were open expressions of love and encouragement. "Remember to be kind to yourself today," Esperanza said to Carmen as she handed her the lunchbox. "You are braver than any problem you might face," she told Lucia. And to Sophia, "Your heart is full of wonderful things waiting to be shared with the world." But the most significant change was that Victoria had learned to express these sentiments herself. As she hugged Sophia goodbye, she whispered, "I love watching you become exactly who you're meant to be." That evening, as the 4 of them sat around the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, working on homework together, Victoria reflected on the transformation that had begun with hidden notes in a lunchbox. Esperanza had seen what Victoria had missed: that love cannot be efficiently scheduled or professionally managed. It requires presence, attention, and the willingness to prioritize a child's emotional world above adult convenience and achievement. The business continued to thrive, but Victoria had learned to measure success differently. She measured it in Sophia's laughter, in the security Carmen and Lucia felt in their new home, in the grateful tears in Esperanza's eyes when she tucked her daughters into bed each night, instead of saying goodbye on a video call. 1 year after the discovery that changed everything, Victoria established the Ashford Morales Foundation, dedicated to keeping immigrant families together while they pursued better opportunities. The foundation's mission statement, written jointly by Victoria and Esperanza, read, "Every child deserves to have their heart seen, their dreams nurtured, and their worth affirmed daily by someone who loves them unconditionally." On the foundation's inauguration day, as Victoria stood before an audience of potential donors and media representatives, she looked out at the crowd and saw Esperanza sitting in the front row with Carmen, Lucia, and Sofia. All 4 of them were beaming with pride, not because of Victoria's professional achievement, but because they had become a family in the truest sense of the word. "This foundation exists," Victoria told the audience, because a woman I barely noticed taught me that the most important investments we make are not in portfolios or properties, but in the hearts of the children who depend on us. She showed me that sometimes the people we consider invisible are the ones who see most clearly what really matters. After the event, as they drove home together, all 5 of them crowded into Victoria's Mercedes because they had decided they preferred being together to traveling separately. Sophia asked a question that perfectly captured their transformation. "Mom," she said, "do you think other families could learn what we learned?" Victoria met Esperanza's eyes in the rear-view mirror, both of them smiling at the word mom that had replaced the formal mother months earlier. "I think," Victoria said, "that love has a way of teaching us what we need to know, as long as we're willing to listen." Esperanza reached over and squeezed Victoria's shoulder. "And sometimes," she added, "the best lessons come in the smallest packages." In the back seat, Carmen was teaching Sophia a Spanish song while Lucia worked on mathematics problems that Victoria had learned to help with despite her busy schedule. The sound of their voices, mixing languages, sharing knowledge, expressing joy without reservation, filled the car with a richness that no amount of money could have purchased. As they pulled into the circular drive of Rosewood Estate, Victoria realized that the house no longer felt like a monument to success. It felt like home. The marble halls echoed with children's laughter. The perfect gardens showed evidence of snow angels and flower crowns. The formal spaces had been transformed into reading nooks and art projects. Most importantly, the kitchen, where the transformation had begun with tears and hidden notes, had become the heart of their family life, where homework and heart-to-heart conversations happened side by side, where love was expressed openly and received without reservation. That night, as Victoria tucked Sophia into bed, her daughter said something that made her heart full to overflowing. "Mom, I'm glad Miss Esperanza wrote those notes." "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because they helped you learn how to say those things to me yourself." Victoria kissed her daughter's forehead, marveling at the wisdom children possess when adults create space for them to express it. "You're absolutely right," she whispered. "Sometimes we need teachers to show us how to love better." As Victoria turned off the lights and headed to her own room, she passed the guest house where Esperanza was reading bedtime stories to Carmen and Lucia in Spanish. Through the window, she could see the 3 of them cuddled together on the small sofa, the twins' faces bright with contentment as their mother's voice wove tales of home and hope. The sight reminded Victoria of the most important lesson Esperanza had taught her, that the greatest privilege was not wealth or status, but the opportunity to be present for the people who needed you most. Some investments paid dividends in dollars and cents. The best investments paid dividends in laughter, love, and the unshakable security that comes from knowing you are seen, valued and cherished exactly as you are. The story that had begun with secret notes in a lunchbox had become something far more powerful, a testament to the transformative potential of love that crosses boundaries of class, culture, and expectation. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives begin with the simple recognition that we have been looking at the wrong things, measuring the wrong successes, and missing the most important truths that have been right in front of us all along. In the end, the notes in Sophia's lunchbox had served their purpose perfectly. They had carried love from one heart to another, until the recipients learned to write love notes of their own, not on paper hidden between sandwiches, but in daily words and actions that affirmed what every child deserves to know, that they are precious, valued and unconditionally loved. The end. If this story of transformation, family, and the power of seeing beyond social boundaries moved you, please share it with others who might need to hear this message. Sometimes the people we overlook hold the keys to our greatest growth. Sometimes love comes in the smallest gestures. And sometimes the most important conversations begin when we finally ask the right questions and listen with our hearts instead of our assumptions.